Fantastic. Let's take another question.
I've got one if no one wants to go.
Yeah, go for it.
Greg, you alluded to, and this question's for everybody, but you alluded to you took a job for a year and you kind of knew right away it wasn't for you. So you moved on. As newer, younger managers, we're also hiring people that we might know right away it's not the right job for them, so we have to move on. And I was put in a position that I had to do that right away when I took this job. And it was actually easier than I thought. It still feels bad, you feel bad for the person, but where I've struggled is that person in the next tier up. They're not quite that bad. They're not quite good enough either. And it's kind of a struggle of, all right, how do I move on from this? How do I make sure the next person I bring in is actually going to be better and not be that person that's wrong for the role? And then all of a sudden I've set myself back instead of forward. So some success stories maybe that you guys have had where that person's in that middle tier where it is time to move on and how to do it successfully.
I'll take it first then. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I remember when I became a head of industrial sales for General Cable, and I inherited a team. And I inherited a team of 7 people, and it was clear one of them was in the wrong spot. And to me, a big part, when you have people who aren't successful, I always blame at least half that on the manager, right? Because if that manager put him in it. And so I felt it was my responsibility to either figure out how he could be successful or to move him back to a spot, which is what ended up happening, where he could be successful. And the biggest part of that is the ego part, right? It's not that he's doing, because if someone's struggling, they usually know they're struggling. They're not really happy. And so how do you get them to get back to what they really were successful at, the reason they got over-promoted, really, and how do you get them successfully back to that spot, keeping their ego intact, keeping their confidence intact, and that's all a matter of how you manage it and working with that person, being candid with them, I think. The part about how you prevent the mistake, I would say, we were talking a little earlier at lunch, I really like promoting from within because you see a lot of things that people are capable of, and you know their weaknesses. It's just important to know the weaknesses as you know the strengths. And it's less risky. Now, there's always going to be some, insertion of talent from outside, and that's where I spend a lot of time networking, interviewing, meeting people. So what I can call de-risk it, because if you rely on the interview process, I'm sure this is a great interviewer, and I'm sure there's lots of great interviewers. Interviewing is a really hard process, and if you're relying solely on that, to me, you're exposing yourself to a lot of risk.
I actually have 2 things on it. What we've done, we're getting ready to promote people on my team, and what we did is we promoted from within. We knew that they were the right people, but part of the offer process, we said, you know what, we're going to give you a 6-month review, and then we'll both sit down and make sure the position was right for you. You're phenomenal in the role you have now. That's why we're giving you the position for advancement. So what we don't want to do is over-promote someone and have the thing where they actually leave the company. We want to actually promote them, let them grow into it, and give them a 6-month buffer, and then let them take it back. I'll give you some interviewing advice, because if you want to know my #1 challenge, anybody that's talked to me, it's attracting talent, retaining talent. I do interviews completely different than probably most. I interview people typically face-to-face, 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And the reason why I do that is I found that people interview very well up to the hour. And that second hour is when you truly find out who they are and what they are. And I've seen the same actually on phone interviews. Everybody's good to the half hour, but if you take it up to the 45 minutes or an hour. So I would strongly suggest, if you're interviewing for a key role, invest the time in the people.
And I had an example when I was at NSI. There was a young man on our team on the marketing side, and I thought, he's great in front of customers. He would be great in a sales role. And I talked to him about the opportunity. He's like, yes, that sounds great. I'm so excited. I can make a lot of money. That's what he's thinking. I can make a lot of money. I said, okay, well, but you're happy where you're at. So we did the trial run, and at the end of the run, because I had said, here's the 4 key things you need to do to be successful in the first 6 months, and he did, like 1.5, and that's an indicator that, it's not working, and he was telling me really what he thought I wanted to hear, and really I was providing an opportunity, but at the end of the day, we both said, the role for you, but no harm, no foul. But I always gave them the out. At the end of the 6 months, if this doesn't work for either of us, we just go, back to where we're at. And really, it was the best thing for him. And looking back, I'm like, there were flags, there were signs that I wasn't picking up, because in my mind, he would be so good at that role that I really wanted to give him that opportunity. So,
as a HR professional, Melissa, when is the right time to give feedback to someone? Usually, I think a lot of managers give feedback when it's already a performance enhancement plan or whatever. Can you talk about feedback and how you coach when to give feedback?
I was just going to highlight what Pam was saying, is the fact that it's communication, really, when it comes down to it. It cannot be just, like you indicated, just when that performance improvement plan needs to be put in place. It has to be constant touch points. I know when I started at DSG, I had a manager call and say, okay, so I want to let somebody go. They're in a town about 100 miles away. It was one of our segment managers, and I'm just going to call him. You're okay with that, right? Like, I can just call him and let him go. And I thought, am I really on the phone right now with a manager that is telling me that they're gonna fire somebody on the phone? And so, I sat there for a moment and I said, okay, so obviously I just haven't had the opportunity to review the file. There must be a lot of documentation and a lot of conversation that has happened if you are telling me that you're gonna let somebody go tomorrow, and then you're asking me, the only question you have for me is, can I do it over the phone? So the conversation proceeded, and I said, why don't you send me everything you have, expecting, a PDF full of documentation, and there was nothing. There was nothing. So needless to say, that person did not get let go that next day. That was, in fact, so much so a performance question on the manager side of it, right? But it had to be, and I'm an advocate, first and foremost, about the fact that, if you don't give the opportunity to any person that you put in a position, then shame on you, shame on us, the company, because really we've hired them for a reason. We've given them the opportunity to have the job, and you have to give them every opportunity to succeed. If they don't succeed, and you have given them every opportunity, all the tools, all the coaching, all the mentoring that you can give them, then the opportunity is that they're not going to be the right fit.
It's a two-way street, right?
Yep.
Some of it is the reflection on the manager, and some is the employee. So let's take more questions got one over here, Mark.
Hi everyone, Mark Rosenstein from Connection in Chicago. I actually have two questions, if that's okay. The first one is, what steps are you all taking to not only attract but retain young talent into your businesses in the industry? And two, as a growing company, we're opening more locations, all which develop their own cultures, and do you have any advice or best practices for transcending those cultural and geographical boundaries across your organization?
Who wants to jump into that one? Jason?
On the Manufacturers Council, we've done a ton of work on retaining talent and retention. And the reason why I think as an industry as a whole, we're all struggling with that. I can tell you, Hellerman Tyton, we have a whole team that's all they're doing all the time. I think what we've seen is it's easier for us probably to do it where we have, big manufacturing or corporate facilities. It's because you can have people in the universities all the time and create that pull through. In my role outside, where I'm placing people around the country, it's been a very much of a challenge retaining those talent or attracting the talent. Retention, I think, is, you have to be the communication with the team. I can tell you that I have honest dialogue with everyone all the time. We're always pretty open about that. If you ask, you can get honest feedback, and I would highly encourage that and create that culture. From a cultural standpoint, I do not hire anyone even remote across the country without going in our corporate facility and seeing the culture. Because you want to make sure it's a cultural fit for them, they're a cultural fit for us, and that they get to touch the leadership of the whole company so they have complete buy-in.
Thank you. Melissa, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say retaining talent. Obviously, we're all up against it. You know, we look at it from the fact of I have a son, and I know I talked yesterday about this quite a bit with everyone when we did the roundtables. But I have a son who's a senior and will be a senior in high school, and so I try to drill into his brain and say, okay, what does it look like for you when I kick you out of my basement? What are you going to do, right? And what does that mean for you as far as what can that employer do for you versus the employee? I always look at it from the perspective of, they're not living to work, it's working to live, right? So how can we balance that? What does that work-life harmony look like? And how can we be advantageous to say, what does that mean to you? I want to learn, and I want to be able to provide that for each and every one of our associates realistically, because I think that we would be naive in the fact that if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to retain. Because when you have 2 offer letters in front of you and we present what is a differentiating factor, we got to look intently at that.
I think, Pam, if you could maybe talk about, you've had several different career paths, and how has culture affected that for you?
Culture is a big deal for me. I think, the folks where I've worked, the companies where I've worked, I still maintain relationships with those people because of their cultures. I have mostly worked for family-owned businesses, so that's a little bit different. The aerospace business was a family-owned business, as is AD, as is Shat-R-Shield, as is Milbank. So that's a little bit different for me, but that's one of the things that also drew me to Shat-R-Shield, and culture is very important. I know one of the things I found out when I came on board, so VP Sales and Marketing, they said, well, every quarter we bring in our sales team because those folks are remote, right? So they don't get to, connect with people at headquarters every day. So we bring them in for 4 days every quarter. So I'm doing the math in my head, and I said, so what you're telling me is I'm going to bring in the sales team out of the field for 1 month out of the year, basically, to have this, quarterly sales team meeting. And my president said, yes, that's exactly right. So I was like, okay, I just need to think about that for a minute and get my head around that number. But at the end of the day, having those gentlemen and folks that are out in the field and are remote, they don't get to have the interactions that the rest of the team gets to have every day, and putting them with their teams because they're inside person, they're tight. And that's a culture thing that we do that's very important. And the onboarding process, Jason mentioned it, we bring them in for a week. We have a whole process that they go through. The 90-day review talks a lot about the onboarding because we're constantly trying to do it better. We have them travel with their peers and again, that's an expense when you have salespeople traveling together, but it's so important that they connect with their peers because they're remote, because they're off in different regions, that they have that opportunity. So, culture is very important. We talk about it at every quarterly meeting. We end those quarterly sales meeting with a full company luncheon out in our manufacturing facility. So they get to talk to, the guy that rushed their order out and thank him personally. And that's really important.
Greg, anything to add on that?
The only thing I'd say is if you when you think about business, if you talk to a top strategy firms, your McKinseys, your Bains, your BCGs, whoever, they will say all day long, the culture eats strategy for lunch. Meaning, if you've got a great strategy and a bad culture, you're not going to be successful. But if you've got a so-so strategy, but you got an outstanding culture, you're going to have a great business. So, back to hiring and retention, and back to your question, hire culture first. You can teach, this isn't that hard of an industry, it's really not. You can teach all this stuff, but if you get the culture part wrong, you'll be fighting it the whole way. So hire culture first and teach everything else.
Eric?
I have a quick add-on question to that in a two-part. I'm curious to see what kind of skills you guys are looking for as we look to add new talent to the industry. The topic at the top is the future of industry. So what skill sets are trending, if you will, or becoming very popular that we're looking for in this future workforce? And where are some of those areas that we're looking for that talent in? Are we getting creative? Are we going traditional routes? Or are we looking for people with that industry experience and seeing if we can make a fit?
I would say that the last few hires that I've made have been completely out of industry. And I would say that it wasn't by choice, it was by interviewing all the people that were in the room and who brought the different skill sets. And I think what's interesting is you see that our industry is becoming extremely exciting. You're having conversations from a financial aspect every day. I've hired financial people. You start thinking about the Internet of Things and where we're going from an IT and a technology standpoint. I think where we are today with what we have is going to look completely different where we are in 10 years. I think that whole integrator approach from a distribution standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint, I think everything's going to change. And I think you have to look forward more than you would of the traditional route. But I would say if we could create the vein to pull the right people out of the right schools, that's probably the best way to scale it.
Any panelists want to add to that?
I would say too, we started a program, a SPARK program acronym, and we brought somebody in that had graduated from college but had no industry knowledge at all, even so much so as what is the industry. So, and providing that capability, and that's, hiring for obviously the aptitude and the attitude to want to be challenged and to be able to do the job, the skill set, bringing forth the capability to learn our industry, and it's been a great fit. It's a program that we put in place and certainly need to enhance and bring in more people to it. But this person, came in completely eyes wide open. And when you have that and you have appreciation for the fact that they're a sponge and they want to learn, and he did, and he now has a role in one of our branches. So, completely a different, non-traditional, right? Did not start in the warehouse, did not, work at the city desk, and now is in inside sales.